I never thought a pile of wet leaves would become the hill I was willing to die on. But here I was, staring at a $300 fine from the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association for unauthorized landscape debris removal during restricted hours. My name is Isaac Young, and I had lived in this Charlotte, North Carolina planned community for exactly 8 months when the madness began. I worked as a software engineer from home, which meant I had the luxury of maintaining my property during daylight hours when most of my neighbors were at their offices. That Tuesday morning in late October, I had woken up early to rake the massive pile of oak leaves that had accumulated overnight from the storm. The weather forecast called for rain later that week, and I knew from experience that wet leaves turned into a slippery, moldy mess if left too long. I had started raking around 7 in the morning, enjoying the cool autumn air and the quiet neighborhood. The pile grew substantial, easily 4 feet high and 6 feet wide. By 9, I had bagged most of it and dragged the bags to the curb for the Thursday pickup. I felt productive, responsible even. My lawn looked pristine compared to several other houses on the street where leaves still carpeted the grass in thick brown layers. That is when Sharon Hendricks appeared. Sharon was the HOA president, a woman in her early 50s with the kind of helmet hair that looked like it could survive a hurricane. She wore pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the Riverside Meadows logo embroidered on the chest, like she was some kind of neighborhood security force. Her oversized sunglasses perched on her nose as she marched across my lawn, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Young," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "I need to inform you that you are in violation of Community Guidelines Section 12, subsection 4. I leaned against my rake, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, what violation?" She tapped her pen against the clipboard with sharp, staccato clicks. "Yard maintenance and debris removal is only permitted between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. on weekdays, and noon to 4 p.m. on weekends. You have been conducting unauthorized landscape activities outside these designated hours." I blinked at her, waiting for the punchline. "You're joking. I was raking leaves. The rules are quite clear, Mr. Young." These hours were established to ensure that noise and activity levels remain appropriate for all residents. Some people work night shifts. Some people have small children. We cannot have power equipment and yard work disrupting the peace at all hours. "I was using a rake," I said slowly. "A manual rake, not a leaf blower, not a mower. A rake." Sharon's lips pursed into a thin line. "The regulation does not differentiate between types of equipment or tools. All yard maintenance falls under the same restrictions. I will be issuing you a written warning and a fine of $300. $300 for raking leaves an hour before your arbitrary window opens." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "That's insane. The fine structure is clearly outlined in your HOA covenant, which you signed upon purchase of your property. If you wish to dispute this, you may submit a written appeal to the board, though I should mention that, as president, I review all appeals personally." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made you want to check your wallet afterward. "Have a pleasant day, Mr. Young." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing in my yard full of leaf bags, rake in hand, feeling like I had just been mugged in broad daylight. The official fine arrived in my mailbox 2 days later, printed on official Riverside Meadows HOA letterhead. It detailed my violation with timestamps and even included a photo of me raking, which meant Sharon had been surveilling the neighborhood or had access to someone who was. The thought made my skin crawl. I spent that evening reading through my HOA covenant, all 73 pages of dense legal language, Sure enough, buried in Section 12, subsection 4, was the exact regulation Sharon had cited. What infuriated me more was discovering the fee schedule. First offense was $300. Second offense was $500. Third offense was $750, plus the board could put a lien on your property. My wife Jennifer, who worked as a paralegal, read over my shoulder and shook her head. "This is technically enforceable," she said. "You did sign the covenant. But Isaac, this is ridiculous. Who finds someone for raking leaves at 9 in the morning? Someone who has nothing better to do than terrorize her neighbors," I muttered. Jennifer squeezed my shoulder. "You could pay it and just follow their schedule from now on. Pick your battles." She was right, of course. The smart thing would be to pay the fine, rake my leaves between 10 and 6, and move on with my life. But something about the situation ate at me. It was not just the money or even the stupid rule. It was the way Sharon had smiled, the way she clearly enjoyed wielding this petty power over people just trying to maintain their homes. I paid the fine, but I started paying attention to other things in the neighborhood. Riverside Meadows was a planned community of about 200 homes, built around a central clubhouse and pool area. The clubhouse was a decent-sized building with a gym, a meeting room, and a kitchen that residents could rent for events. Behind the clubhouse was a wooded area that the HOA maintained as a natural preserve, though it was really just a buffer between our development and the commercial strip on the other side. I had noticed the paths through the woods before, used them for jogging a few times. But I had never paid much attention to the back of the clubhouse itself. That changed one morning when I decided to extend my run through the full trail loop. The back of the clubhouse had 2 emergency exits, clearly marked with illuminated exit signs. Both doors had crash bars and were required by North Carolina Building Code to remain accessible and unobstructed at all times. I knew this because Jennifer had dealt with several commercial lease cases involving fire code violations. Both emergency exits were completely blocked. Someone had stacked pool furniture against one door, 5 chairs high and at least 3 deep. The other exit had a pile of landscaping equipment, including a commercial-grade mower, several bags of fertilizer, and an assortment of rakes, shovels, and other tools. You could not have opened either door more than a few inches without moving a substantial amount of heavy equipment and furniture. I stood there for a long moment, my mind churning. The clubhouse hosted events regularly. The HOA held their monthly meetings there. The community had a book club that met there twice a month. If there was ever a fire or emergency and people tried to use those back exits, they would be trapped. This was not just a violation of some petty neighborhood rule. This was a legitimate safety hazard and a serious building code violation. I pulled out my phone and took several photos from different angles, making sure the exit signs were visible in the shots. Then I kept running, but my mind was racing faster than my feet. That evening, I did some research. North Carolina Fire Code was explicit about emergency exits. They had to be clearly marked, illuminated, and unobstructed at all times. Blocking an emergency exit could result in fines ranging from $500 to $5,000 per violation. And in commercial or community buildings, the responsible party could even face criminal charges if someone was injured. I pulled up the Riverside Meadows HOA contact form on their website and drafted an email. I kept it professional and factual, explaining what I had observed and suggesting that the board address the issue immediately for liability reasons. I attached the photos and cited the relevant building code sections. I sent it to the general HOA email address and specifically CC'd Sharon Hendricks. 2 days passed with no response. Then 3. Then a week. I checked the back of the clubhouse again during my next run. The exits were still blocked. In fact, more items had been added. Someone had leaned a ladder against one door and stacked several boxes of pool chemicals in front of the other. I sent a follow-up email, this time more direct. I stated that if the fire code violations were not corrected within 72 hours, I would be filing a complaint with the Charlotte Fire Marshal's office. This time, I got a response within an hour. The email came from Sharon Hendricks personally. It was 2 sentences long. The storage arrangements at the clubhouse are internal HOA business and not a matter for homeowner concern. Please refrain from further unnecessary complaints. I read it 3 times, each time feeling my blood pressure rise a little higher. She was blowing me off. Worse, she was essentially telling me to mind my own business about a serious safety violation that could get people killed. Jennifer found me at my desk, glaring at my computer screen. "What's wrong?" I showed her the email chain. She read through it, her expression shifting from curious to concerned to angry. "Isaac, she cannot just ignore this. Those are legitimate code violations. If the fire marshal finds out, the HOA could be hit with massive fines. Why would she risk that?" "Because she is more interested in being right than being safe," I said. "And she is definitely not interested in taking direction from the guy she just fined for raking leaves." "So file the complaint with the fire marshal," Jennifer said. "You gave her a chance to fix it. She refused. Now it is time to go over her head." I wanted to. I really did. But something held me back. Maybe it was the fact that I still had to live in this neighborhood. Maybe it was not wanting to be known as the guy who sixed the authorities on the HOA. Or maybe, in the back of my mind, a different idea was forming. "Not yet," I said. "I want to try one more thing first." The monthly HOA meeting was held the 3rd Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. I had never attended one before. I had better things to do than listen to neighbors argue about mailbox colors and grass height. But that Thursday, I cleared my schedule and walked over to the clubhouse at 6:45. The meeting room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Sharon held the center position, flanked by 4 other board members I vaguely recognized from neighborhood events. There were maybe 20 other homeowners scattered through the chairs, most looking like they would rather be anywhere else. I took a seat in the back row and waited. The meeting started with Sharon reading through the minutes from the previous month, followed by a treasurer's report that revealed the HOA had almost $80,000 in reserve funds. Then came old business, which involved a lengthy debate about whether to replace the pool umbrellas or just buy new canopies for the existing frames. Finally, Sharon asked if there was any new business from the floor. I raised my hand. Sharon's eyes found me immediately, and I saw her jaw tighten. "Yes, Mr. Young," I stood up, keeping my voice level and professional. "I wanted to bring to the board's attention a safety concern regarding the clubhouse. The 2 emergency exits at the rear of the building are currently blocked by furniture and equipment. This is a violation of North Carolina Fire Code and poses a serious risk to anyone using this building. I am requesting that the board address this immediately." A murmur ran through the other homeowners. A few people turned to look at me, while others glanced at the board members. Sharon's expression did not change. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Young. The board is aware of the storage situation, and it is being managed appropriately. Is there any other new business? With respect, Mrs. Hendricks, blocking emergency exits is not a storage situation. It is a code violation that could result in significant fines and liability if there was an emergency. I have photos and documentation if the board would like to review them." That will not be necessary. Sharon's voice had taken on an edge. As I said, the situation is being managed. This is not an appropriate forum for challenging board decisions. If you have further concerns, you may submit them in writing. I did submit them in writing, I said, letting a little heat into my voice now. A week and a half ago, I received a 2-sentence response telling me it was none of my concern. Now the murmurs were louder. Several homeowners were definitely paying attention. One of the other board members, an older man whose name tag read Bill Peterson, leaned toward Sharon and whispered something. She shook her head curtly. "Mr. Young," Sharon said, "you are out of order. The board has acknowledged your concern and will handle it as we see fit. Please sit down or I will have to ask you to leave the meeting." I stayed standing. "Mrs. Hendricks, I am not trying to be difficult. I am trying to prevent people from getting hurt. All I am asking is that the board clear those exits. It would take maybe an hour of work." "The meeting rules require that all new business be submitted in writing at least 48 hours before the meeting," Sharon said, her voice rising. "You have not followed proper procedure. This discussion is closed. Please sit down." We locked eyes for a long moment. I could see the challenge there, the dare for me to push further. Part of me wanted to keep arguing, to force the issue in front of all these witnesses. But I also knew that winning this fight right now was not possible. Sharon had the gavel, and she was not going to let me embarrass her in front of the community. I sat down, but I did not look away from her. The meeting continued with a discussion about the holiday decoration guidelines for December. I barely heard any of it. My mind was working through options, consequences, paths forward. When the meeting adjourned, several homeowners approached me in the parking lot. A woman in her 30s named Rachel Martinez said, "I am glad you brought up the exits. I host a yoga class in the clubhouse twice a week." I never realized they were blocked. An older gentleman named Frank Delgado added, "Sharon has been getting more and more difficult over the past year. She fined me $200 because my garbage cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours. I had the flu and could not bring them in right away." Others shared their own stories. Fines for holiday decorations being up 2 days past the deadline. Fines for parking a work van in a driveway overnight. Fines for having a lawn care company service the yard on a Sunday. The pattern was clear. Sharon Hendricks was running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, and she was funding it through aggressive enforcement of every petty rule she could find. I drove home that night with a decision solidifying in my mind. If Sharon wanted to ignore a legitimate safety concern because of her ego, fine. If she wanted to treat homeowners like subjects rather than neighbors, fine. But I was done playing nice. I was not going to file a complaint with the fire marshal. Not yet. Instead, I was going to let Sharon's own negligence speak for itself. Starting the next morning, I began documenting everything. I ran past the clubhouse every day, photographing the blocked exits from multiple angles with timestamps. The doors remained obstructed, day after day. Sometimes the items shifted slightly, suggesting people were accessing the storage area, but the exits themselves never cleared. I also started attending every HOA function I could. The book club meeting, the community yard sale planning session, the pool maintenance committee gathering. Every single time, I made a point of casually mentioning the blocked exits to whoever would listen. "You know, I noticed those back doors are still blocked," I would say. "Seems like a liability." Most people agreed it was a problem. A few said they had not even realized the exits were there. But nobody seemed willing to make waves with Sharon directly. I also started reading the HOA covenant with the kind of attention usually reserved for legal contracts, which of course it was. And buried in all that dense language, I found something interesting. Section 18. Subsection 7 stated that any homeowner could request a special meeting of the full membership if they collected signatures from at least 20% of the households. At such a meeting, a majority vote of attending members could overrule any board decision or even remove board members. Riverside Meadows had 203 homes. 20% was just under 41 households. I needed 41 signatures. I spent the next 2 weeks walking the neighborhood in the evenings. I printed up a simple petition explaining the safety concern and requesting a special meeting to address it. I knocked on doors, introduced myself, and asked people to sign. Some people signed immediately, grateful someone was finally standing up to Sharon. Others were hesitant, worried about becoming targets themselves. A few refused outright, either because they supported Sharon or because they did not want the drama. By the end of the second week, I had 37 signatures. Close, but not enough. That is when things escalated. I came home on a Tuesday afternoon to find a certified letter from the HOA in my mailbox. Inside was a notice of violation and a fine for $500. The alleged offense was improper drainage modification causing water runoff onto common property. I read the letter twice, completely baffled. I had not done anything to my drainage. My yard sloped naturally toward the street, same as it had since I moved in. I walked around my property looking for any sign of water damage or runoff issues. There was nothing. I called the HOA office and got voicemail. I sent an email asking for clarification on the specific violation, including photos of my yard showing normal, unchanged drainage. The response came from Sharon. Violation observed during routine property inspection on November 19th. Fine stands. Payment due within 30 days. It was completely fabricated. She was retaliating against me for the petition drive, and she was not even bothering to be subtle about it. Jennifer was furious when I showed her the letter. "This is harassment," she said. "She is making up violations to punish you. You could sue the HOA for this." "Lawsuits take months and cost thousands of dollars," I said. "And Sharon knows that most people will not bother. They will just pay the fine because fighting it is more expensive." "So what are you going to do?" I looked at the letter, then at the petition with its 37 signatures sitting on my desk. "I am going to get 4 more signatures, and then I am going to burn her little kingdom down." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Frank Delgado, the older gentleman who had been fined for his garbage cans, called me that weekend. "Isaac, I heard about your drainage fine. That is complete nonsense. Sharon did the same thing to me last year, claimed I had modified my landscaping without approval. I had not touched anything." "Did you fight it?" I asked. "I paid it," he admitted. "Did not seem worth the hassle, but I am tired of watching her bully people. I talked to some of my neighbors. We have got signatures for you." He delivered 4 more signatures that afternoon, putting me over the required threshold. I submitted the petition to the HOA office on Monday morning, along with a formal request for a special meeting to be held within 30 days, as required by the covenant. I sent copies to all 5 board members via certified mail, creating a paper trail. Sharon called me that evening. I almost did not answer, but curiosity won. "Mr. Young, this petition is completely unnecessary," she said, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. "If you have concerns about the clubhouse storage, we can discuss them through proper channels." "I tried proper channels," I said. "I sent emails. I brought it up at a meeting. You told me it was none of my business and then fined me for a fake drainage violation in retaliation." "The drainage violation was legitimate and documented." "Show me the documentation. Show me the photos, the inspection report, anything that proves water from my property is causing problems. Because I have photos showing my yard is completely normal. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, the board will review your petition. If it meets the requirements, we will schedule the meeting. The covenant says you have to schedule it within 30 days, not if you feel like it, within 30 days. Good evening, Mr. Young. She hung up. The special meeting was scheduled for December 19th, exactly 29 days after I submitted the petition. Sharon was cutting it as close as legally possible, probably hoping people would lose interest or get too busy with the holidays. But I was not letting this drop. I spent those 4 weeks preparing. I printed out copies of all my photos of the blocked exits, organized by date. I printed the relevant fire code sections. I created a simple presentation showing the violations and explaining the risks. I also put together a timeline of Sharon's escalating retaliation against me and several other homeowners. More importantly, I reached out to everyone who had signed the petition and to everyone who had complained about Sharon at that first meeting. I asked them to attend and to spread the word. This was not just about blocked exits anymore. This was about whether the HOA was going to serve the community or serve Sharon's ego. The response was better than I hoped. People were tired of the aggressive fining, the petty rules, the sense of being watched and judged constantly. My situation had crystallized something that had been building for months. 3 days before the meeting, I received another certified letter from the HOA. This one was a notice of violation for unapproved political activity within the community. The fine was $750. Apparently, walking around the neighborhood with a petition counted as political activity under Section 23, Subsection 9 of the Covenant. The rule was intended to prevent people from campaigning for actual political candidates in the development, but Sharon was stretching it to cover my petition drive. I laughed when I read it. I actually laughed out loud, because it was so transparently vindictive that it would only make my case stronger at the meeting. I did not pay that fine either. December 19th arrived cold and clear. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m., but I showed up at 6:30 to set up my laptop and projector. I was not taking any chances that technical difficulties would derail this. By 6:45, the meeting room was filling up. By 7, every seat was taken and people were standing along the walls. I counted at least 90 homeowners, maybe more. I had never seen that many people at an HOA meeting. Sharon and the board members sat at their table, looking increasingly uncomfortable as more and more people packed in. Sharon kept glancing at the crowd with an expression that oscillated between defiance and worry. At 7 on the dot, Sharon called the meeting to order. This special meeting has been called at the request of Isaac Young to address concerns about clubhouse storage. Per the covenant, we will hear from Mr. Young and then open the floor for discussion before any vote. I stood and walked to the front of the room with my laptop. I had practiced this presentation a dozen times, but my heart was still pounding. Public speaking had never been my strength. But this mattered too much to mess up. Thank you all for coming, I started. I requested this meeting because of a serious safety issue that the board has refused to address. The 2 emergency exits at the back of this building have been blocked for at least 6 weeks, probably longer. I clicked to the first photo, showing the exit door blocked by pool furniture. A few people gasped. I clicked through more photos, showing different angles, different dates, the gradual accumulation of more and more items blocking the exits. North Carolina Fire Code is very clear, I continued, pulling up the relevant statute on screen. Emergency exits must be unobstructed at all times. Blocking them is not just a code violation. It is a serious safety hazard. If there was a fire right now and everyone tried to evacuate through those back doors, they could not. People would be trapped. I looked around the room. I had everyone's attention now. Even Sharon was staring at the screen. I first brought this to the board's attention on November 8th. I sent a detailed email with photos and cited the specific code violations. I offered to help clear the exits myself. The board's response was to tell me it was none of my business. I pulled up Sharon's two-sentence email on screen. Several people in the audience shook their heads. I brought it up again at the November monthly meeting. Mrs. Hendricks told me I was out of order and threatened to have me removed from the meeting if I continued. I clicked to the next slide, showing the timeline of fines I had received. After that meeting, I started collecting signatures for this special meeting. In response, the board has issued me 3 fines totaling $1,550, $300 for raking leaves outside designated hours, $500 for drainage issues that do not exist, $750 for exercising my rights under the covenant to petition for this meeting. The murmur in the room was getting louder. I saw several people glancing at Sharon with undisguised anger. "This is not just about me," I said. Over the past few weeks, I have talked to dozens of neighbors. Frank Delgado was fined $200 for having his garbage cans visible while he had the flu. Rachel Martinez was fined $300 because her holiday wreath was 2 inches wider than the maximum allowed diameter. Jim and Lydia Thornton were fined $400 because their teenage son parked his car in the driveway overnight while visiting from college. I paused, letting that sink in. An HOA is supposed to maintain property values and create a pleasant community. Instead, our HOA has become a revenue generator that funds itself by trapping residents with gotcha enforcement of petty rules. And when someone raises a legitimate safety concern, they get targeted with even more fines. I clicked to my final slide, which simply listed the fire code statute again. All I am asking is that the board do the right thing. Clear those exits, stop the retaliatory fining, start treating homeowners like neighbors instead of subjects. That is what this meeting is about. I sat down to scattered applause. My hands were shaking with adrenaline. Sharon stood, her face flushed red. Mr. Young's presentation is full of mischaracterizations and exaggerations. The exits are not blocked, they are simply being used for temporary storage during the off-season. The fines he received were all legitimate violations of clearly stated rules. And as for his suggestion that the board is somehow targeting him, that is completely baseless. Bill Peterson, the other board member who had tried to whisper to Sharon at the previous meeting, stood up. "Sharon, I have to say, I am troubled by what I am hearing. I was not aware that we had issued fines to Mr. Young after he submitted his petition. That does look like retaliation." "It is not retaliation if the violations are real," Sharon snapped. "Are they real, though?" This came from Rachel Martinez, standing in the middle of the room. "Because I have lived next to Isaac for 6 months, and I have never seen any drainage problems with his property. His yard is immaculate." Another voice chimed in from the back. "I got fined last month for having my porch light out. $200 because one bulb burned out and I did not replace it fast enough. That is not about maintaining the community. That is just mean." The room erupted into overlapping conversations. Multiple people started sharing their own stories of questionable fines and heavy-handed enforcement. Sharon kept trying to call for order, but nobody was listening to her anymore. Finally, Frank Delgado stood and his voice boomed over the noise. "I move that we vote to remove Sharon Hendricks as HOA president, effective immediately, for failure to address legitimate safety concerns and for abuse of her authority." "Second," someone called out immediately. Sharon's face went pale. You cannot just remove a board president without cause and proper procedure. Actually, we can, I said, standing again. Section 18, subsection 9 of the Covenant allows for removal of any board member by a 2/3 majority vote at a special meeting called for that purpose. We called this meeting to address your failure to handle safety issues. Removal is within scope. Bill Peterson nodded. He is right. The Covenant allows it. We need to vote. Sharon looked around the table at the other board members, clearly expecting support, but they were all avoiding her eyes. Even her allies could see which way the wind was blowing. All in favor of removing Sharon Hendricks as HOA president, Bill said. A forest of hands went up. I did not even try to count them, but it was easily more than 2/3, probably closer to 90%. Opposed, 4 hands. Sharon's and 3 homeowners I did not recognize. The motion passes, Bill said quietly. Sharon, I am sorry, but you are no longer president of this board. For a moment, I thought Sharon might actually explode. Her face cycled through shades of red and purple. Then she grabbed her purse and her clipboard and stormed out of the room without another word. The meeting continued for another hour. Bill Peterson took over as interim president. The first order of business was authorizing an immediate clearing of the clubhouse emergency exits. 4 volunteers, myself included, went outside right then and there and spent 30 minutes moving all the furniture and equipment away from the doors. When we tested them, both exits opened smoothly onto the back patio area, just as they were designed to do. The second order of business was reviewing the fine structure and enforcement policies. After considerable discussion, the group voted to implement a warning system for first-time minor violations, raise the threshold for what constituted a finnable offense, and create an appeals process that involved the full board rather than just the president. Finally, they voted to rescind all fines issued to me and several other homeowners whose violations appeared retaliatory or fabricated. I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Jennifer met me at the door, and I filled her in on everything that had happened. So it is over? She asked. The meeting part is over, I said, but I am not sure Sharon is going to let this go quietly. I was right. The next morning, I received an email from Sharon's personal account. No subject line, just 2 sentences. You may have won tonight, but you have made an enemy. I will not forget this. It was melodramatic and vaguely threatening, and I forwarded it immediately to Bill Peterson along with a note suggesting that if Sharon continued to harass homeowners, the board might want to consider further action. But the days passed, and nothing happened. Sharon stopped attending HOA functions. Her house went up for sale in January. By February, she had moved out of Riverside Meadows entirely. Bill Peterson proved to be a competent and reasonable president. The HOA continued to enforce important rules about property maintenance and aesthetics, but the atmosphere changed. People stopped feeling like they were living under surveillance. The fine revenue dropped dramatically, which meant the budget had to be adjusted, but the community voted to accept higher annual dues rather than fund operations through gotcha enforcement. The emergency exits at the clubhouse remained clear. Bill had signs installed reminding everyone that blocking them was both illegal and dangerous. I wish I could say that was the end of the story. A satisfying resolution where common sense prevailed, and the neighborhood returned to peace. But life is messier than that, and Sharon Hendricks was not quite done causing problems. In March, I received a letter from a law firm representing Sharon. She was suing me personally for defamation, claiming that my statements at the special meeting had damaged her reputation and caused emotional distress. She was seeking $50,000 in damages, Jennifer read the letter and shook her head. This is nonsense. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Everything you said at that meeting was factually accurate and documented. No lawyer with any sense would take this case to trial. So why did a lawyer send this letter? Because Sharon probably paid them a retainer to scare you, Jennifer said. It is called a SLAPP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. The goal is not to win. The goal is to make defending yourself so expensive and stressful that you back down. I am not backing down. I know you are not. Which is why I already have a call scheduled with a friend from law school who specializes in HOA disputes. We are going to fight this, and when we win, we are going to make Sharon pay our legal fees. The lawsuit dragged on for 4 months. It turned out Jennifer was right. Sharon had no actual case. Her lawyer could not produce any evidence that my statements were false or made with malicious intent. Every claim I made at the meeting was backed up by photographs, emails, and testimony from other homeowners. In July, a judge dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning Sharon could not refile it. The judge also ordered Sharon to pay our legal fees, which amounted to just over $12,000. But the lawsuit had one unexpected consequence. During discovery, Sharon's lawyer had to turn over various HOA documents, including detailed financial records. Jennifer's friend noticed some irregularities and brought them to Bill Peterson's attention. It turned out Sharon had been helping herself to HOA funds for personal expenses. Nothing huge, but over her 3 years as president, she had siphoned off almost $15,000 in fake reimbursements for supplies she never purchased, services she never rendered, and mileage she never drove. Bill Peterson was livid. He reported the findings to the full board, and they voted unanimously to file a criminal complaint for embezzlement. That is when the police got involved. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department assigned a detective to investigate the financial irregularities. Detective Maria Simmons was a sharp woman in her 40s who seemed bemused by the idea of HOA embezzlement, but took the case seriously nonetheless. "You would be surprised how common this is," she told me when she came by to take my statement. "People get a little power, a little access to money that is not closely monitored, and they start to rationalize. They think they work hard for the community, they deserve a little extra compensation. They do not see it as stealing." "What happens now?" I asked. "I collect evidence, build a case, present it to the district attorney. If the DA thinks it is prosecutable, they file charges. Given that we have got clear documentation of the fraudulent reimbursements, I would say charges are likely." Sharon Hendricks was arrested in September on 4 counts of embezzlement. Each count was a Class H felony in North Carolina, punishable by up to 25 months in prison. She was released on bond, and the case was scheduled for trial in November. I did not attend the trial, but Bill Peterson did, and he kept me updated. Sharon's defense was that the reimbursements were legitimate and that any errors were honest mistakes. The prosecution presented a devastating timeline of fake receipts, forged invoices, and purchases that never happened. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 4 counts. The judge sentenced Sharon to 18 months in prison, but suspended the sentence in favor of 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution of the $15,000 plus interest. She was also permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in North Carolina. I felt a strange mix of emotions when I heard the sentence. Part of me felt vindicated. Sharon had abused her power, hurt people, and broken the law. She deserved consequences. But part of me also felt sad that things had escalated this far. If she had just listened to legitimate concerns, if she had treated homeowners with basic respect, none of this would have happened. Jennifer saw me staring out the window that evening and came to stand beside me. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I just wanted her to clear the exits," I said. "That was all I wanted at the start, for her to move some furniture and equipment so people would be safe. How did it turn into embezzlement charges and criminal convictions?" "Because she made bad choices," Jennifer said simply. "You raised a legitimate concern. She chose to ignore it and retaliate against you. She chose to abuse her authority. She chose to steal money. None of that is on you. I know. But I keep thinking about that first morning when she fined me for raking leaves. If I had just paid it and moved on, would all of this still have happened? Probably. Eventually, someone else would have challenged her, or her embezzlement would have been discovered during a routine audit. Sharon was on this path already. You just brought it to light sooner rather than later. She was probably right, but it was hard not to feel like I had been the domino that started the whole chain reaction. Life in Riverside Meadows gradually returned to normal, or at least to a new normal. Bill Peterson served out the remainder of Sharon's term, and then chose not to run for re-election. A woman named Patricia Mills, a retired elementary school principal with a kind face and common-sense attitude, was elected as the new president. Under her leadership, the HOA continued to evolve into something more collaborative and less punitive. The emergency exits at the clubhouse became something of a symbol. Patricia had plaques installed next to each door with a brief explanation of why keeping them clear was important. She used the story, carefully anonymized, as a teaching moment about balancing rules with safety and listening to homeowner concerns. As for me, I went back to my quiet life of remote work and lawn maintenance. I kept my leaves raked and my grass trimmed, and I made sure to do it all between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., not because I was afraid of another fine, but because it did not seem worth the fight anymore. I had spent enough time and energy on HOA drama to last a lifetime. But I also stayed involved in the community in ways I had not before. I joined the Architectural Review Committee, helping to evaluate requests for home modifications. I volunteered for the Neighborhood Watch program. I showed up to the monthly meetings, not every month but regularly enough to stay informed, because I learned something important through all of this. An HOA is not an abstract entity. It is not some faceless bureaucracy that hands down rules from on high. It is just a collection of neighbors trying to maintain their property values and their quality of life. And like any human institution, it is only as good or as bad as the people running it, and the people willing to hold those leaders accountable. Sharon Hendricks turned our HOA into a petty dictatorship because she could, because most people could not be bothered to pay attention or push back. She got away with aggressive fining and selective enforcement because homeowners paid their fines and grumbled privately, but did not make waves. She got away with embezzling because nobody was checking the books. The moment people started paying attention, started asking questions, started demanding accountability, her whole house of cards collapsed. 2 years after that first leaf raking fine, Jennifer and I hosted a neighborhood barbecue in our backyard. It was a warm June evening, and about 30 people showed up. We grilled burgers and hot dogs, set up lawn games for the kids, and just enjoyed being part of a community that felt friendly rather than oppressive. Frank Delgado found me by the grill, beer in hand, and clinked his bottle against mine. "You know, Isaac, I have been thinking. You ever regret not just paying that first fine and keeping your head down?" I considered the question. The whole ordeal had been stressful, time-consuming, and at times genuinely scary. but it had also exposed serious problems and led to meaningful changes. The HOA was better now. The community was better now, and I had made genuine friendships with people I might never have connected with otherwise. "No," I said finally. "I do not regret it. It needed to happen." "Good," Frank said, "because I do not regret signing your petition. Best decision I made that year." As the evening wore on and the sun set over Riverside Meadows, I looked around at my neighbors laughing and talking, kids running through yards without worrying about stepping on the wrong blade of grass, people relaxed and happy in their own homes. This was what an HOA was supposed to enable. Not a surveillance state where everyone lived in fear of fines, but a genuine community where people looked out for each other. All because I refused to let a pile of leaves and a blocked emergency exit be ignored. The following spring, the local Charlotte Observer ran a feature story about HOA reform, and they interviewed me as part of the piece. The reporter, a young woman named Emily Santos, seemed fascinated by the whole saga. "So let me make sure I have this right," she said, reviewing her notes in my living room. "You got fined for raking leaves too early. You noticed fire code violations. The HOA president refused to fix them. You organized a petition, got her removed from office, she sued you, lost, and then got arrested for embezzlement. That all started because you raked leaves at 9 a.m. instead of 10. When you put it that way, it sounds absurd," I said. "It is absurd, but it is also important." Emily tapped her pen against her notepad. "Do you know how many HOA disputes I have covered? Dozens. And they almost always follow the same pattern. Someone on the board gets drunk on power, starts abusing their authority, and homeowners either put up with it or they move. You are the first person I have interviewed who actually fought back successfully." "I had help," I said. "A lot of help. I could not have done it alone. But you started it. You made the first move. Most people would have just paid the fine and tried to stay off the HOA's radar." The article ran 2 weeks later under the headline, "How One Charlotte Homeowner Took Down an HOA Tyrant." It was a fair piece, balanced and well-researched. Emily had interviewed Bill Peterson, Frank Delgado, Rachel Martinez, and several others. She had even reached out to Sharon Hendricks, who declined to comment. The story got picked up by a few national outlets as a human interest piece. For a brief, surreal week, I was something of a minor internet celebrity in HOA reform circles. I did a phone interview with a podcast about neighborhood governance. A lawyer from Texas emailed asking if he could use my story as a case study in a presentation about HOA accountability. The attention was flattering but also exhausting. I was relieved when it faded, and I could go back to being just another homeowner trying to keep his lawn nice and his life quiet. But the story had impact beyond my personal experience. The North Carolina State Legislature introduced a bill that year to reform HOA governance standards. It did not pass in that session, but elements of it were folded into other legislation. New rules required HOAs to have transparent financial reporting and independent audits if their annual budgets exceeded a certain threshold. Fines for minor violations were capped at more reasonable levels. Homeowners were given clearer paths to appeal unjust penalties. None of it was perfect, but it was progress. And while I could not take credit for all of it, I like to think that my stubborn refusal to pay a stupid fine for raking leaves had contributed in some small way to making HOAs in my state a little more accountable. Years have passed since that October morning when Sharon Hendricks walked across my lawn with her clipboard and her petty power trip. My life has moved on in all the normal ways lives do. Jennifer made partner at her law firm. We adopted a dog, a golden retriever named Bailey who sheds constantly, and is utterly indifferent to HOA regulations about pet waste cleanup. I still live in Riverside, Meadows. The thought of moving crossed my mind once or twice during the worst of the drama, but ultimately this is my home. I chose this house, this neighborhood, this community. I was not going to let one tyrant chase me away. The clubhouse still stands at the center of the development, hosting community events and board meetings and yoga classes. The emergency exits at the back are always clear now, kept unobstructed not because of my vigilance, but because it has become part of the community culture. People understand why it matters. Sometimes I run past those exits on my morning jogs, and I think about how close we came to tragedy. If there had been a fire during one of the packed events at the clubhouse, if people had panicked and rushed for those back doors only to find them blocked, people could have died. And Sharon would have been responsible, all because she was too proud to admit she was wrong and too petty to fix a problem raised by someone she saw as a troublemaker. That is the thing about power, even small power like running an HOA. It reveals character. Some people see authority as an opportunity to serve their community, to solve problems and make life better for everyone. Other people see it as an opportunity to control others, to enforce their will and punish anyone who questions them. Sharon Hendricks chose the latter path, and it destroyed her. She lost her position, her reputation, her freedom for a time, and probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and restitution. All because she could not accept criticism and could not resist the temptation to abuse her authority. I do not know where Sharon is now. Last I heard, she had moved to somewhere in South Carolina, probably to escape the stigma of her conviction. I hope she learned something from the experience. I hope she found a way to channel her obvious organizational energy into something positive rather than punitive. But I do not know. People do not always learn the lessons life tries to teach them. As for me, I learned that standing up for what is right is worth the cost, even when the stakes seem small. A pile of leaves, a blocked exit, a $300 fine. None of it was life or death at the beginning, but principle matters, safety matters, accountability matters. And sometimes the only way to protect those things is to refuse to back down, even when backing down would be easier. I also learned that I was not alone. When I started collecting signatures for that petition, I discovered that dozens of my neighbors felt the same frustration and powerlessness. They had been waiting for someone to make the first move, to stand up and say that the emperor had no clothes. Once someone did, once I did, they were ready to support it. Communities are stronger than tyrants, always. But that strength has to be activated. It requires people willing to take the first step, absorb the first retaliation, weather the first storm. It requires courage or stubbornness, or in my case, a little of both. On quiet evenings, when I am sitting on my back porch watching the sun set over Riverside Meadows, Jennifer sometimes asks me if I would do it all again. Would I rake those leaves early? Would I report those blocked exits? Would I organize that petition knowing what it would cost in stress and time and legal fees? My answer is always the same. Yes, without hesitation. Because the alternative was to live in a community governed by fear and pettiness, where safety took a backseat to ego and neighbors were treated as subjects rather than equals. That is not a community worth living in. We made Riverside Meadows better. Not perfect, but better. The HOA still has rules, still collects dues, still makes decisions that not everyone agrees with. But it does so with transparency and accountability. It treats homeowners with respect. It responds to legitimate concerns. It balances the need for standards with the reality that we are all just people trying to live our lives in peace. and the emergency exits at the clubhouse stay clear. Every single day, reminding everyone who sees them that sometimes the smallest stands lead to the biggest changes. That is my legacy here, modest as it is. I was the guy who raked leaves too early and refused to shut up about blocked exits, and in doing so, I helped bring down a tyrant and reform a broken system. Not bad for a software engineer who just wanted his lawn to look nice. I think about my story sometimes when I read news articles about other HOA disputes around the country. There are so many Sharon Hendricks out there, petty tyrants who use their positions to bully and control. There are so many homeowners paying unjust fines and biting their tongues because fighting back seems too hard. I want to tell them that it is not too hard. It is difficult, yes. It requires time and energy and courage, but it is possible. Systems change when people refuse to accept the unacceptable. Tyrants fall when communities stand together. Justice prevails when someone is willing to take that first step, even over something as small as a pile of leaves. My name is Isaac Young. I live in Riverside, Meadows, Charlotte, North Carolina. I got fined for raking leaves too early, and I ended up changing my entire community. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat, because some battles are worth fighting, no matter how small they seem at the start.